Hello, my name's Simon Spain, and this is a rerun of a presentation I gave to the artists from the Huon Valley at the end of April 2020, where we're looking at community engagement. And the morning was broken up into a few different sections. We had an activity with some introductions, something around my practice, getting to the grips of what is community arts and what are the common attributes of engaging creative encounters. That's the main areas we discussed. Quick little something around me. I trained as a printmaker, visual artist, and have been working as a visual artist since I left art college in 1982. Moved into printing books with children from really immediately after leaving art college, going and working with kids in various different sort of programs. Started printing books in the late 80s in London, and then set up Kids Own Publishing Partnership in Ireland, and still publishing books today. Many hundreds of books published by children, for children, by children. Moved to Australia in 2003 to set up Art Play, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Have left Art Play and moved to Tasmania at the beginning of 2016, and I'm based just outside Hobart, down by Clifton Beach, overlooking Pike Clay Lagoon, and since then completed a PhD at RMIT in Melbourne, which is a practice-based PhD, and I'm going to talk a bit about that work too. We did a little activity to start with, which I obviously can't repeat here, but I invited people to select some objects from around themselves in their homes, make a representation of themselves, and give us a few words to tell us how they were feeling. And it was an interesting activity because it, in a way, was a community arts project here, because people were using the assets around them, which quite extraordinarily represented them and their lives very well when we did the report back and show and tell. So something about my practice. I really break my practice into three areas: a personal, a public participatory, and a social or socially engaged practice. Obviously I don't do them on separate days, they're all interlinked, but for me it's been an interesting way about thinking about what I do. As I said, my background is as a visual artist and printmaker. Most recently been working digitally, probably since about 2011. My main drawing and construction tool has been the iPad. And following a major loss in my life in 2012, my work has really been around a recalibration of me and that loss. So I make work digitally, printmaking. This is part print, part digital. And I've always been interested in making books, hand sewing, or having professionally printed, all different ways of book creation. It's a wonderful tool for sharing work. I moved into working with kids as a printmaker, and printing books with kids was something I did very early on in my career and have done since, really. These are where we had design and co-design and print, hand-printed, screen-printed books with children, and there are lots of those on those websites of Kids Own Publishing that I talked about. 2016 moved to Australia to set up Art Play, and Art Play was an empty building, and really what we did with it in the first year was we kept it as an empty building but made it so that it had a program of arts activities with artists, probably employing 250 or so artists a year to come in and run various sorts of program with children and families from across the city. And we would work with companies like Polyglot, who would also come in and present various shows or installations or explorations of different kinds. It was a successful program. It's still running successfully now. It spawned a project called Signal, which was for teenagers, which opened in 2010. And that's my kind of knowledge base around working with communities of children, families and young people. when I came to Tasmania, I started to work with the materials I had here, which was the wood on my land. And after nearly a year of the PhD, I suppose, of exploring and playing with ideas, these figures started to appear in my studio. This wasn't the very first, but it was one of the early ones. There's 7 pieces of wood which are connected together with plaster bandage. And once I'd made one, lots started to appear, and I realized this could be something that other people could make, and they wouldn't be just made by me. So this is a little film here of just speeded up film of how they're made. As I say, there's 7 pieces of cut wood, plaster bandage. This one I'm using here isn't, but since this video, the bandage I use is the kind of bandage that you repair arms or legs with, broken arms or legs. So there's a symbolism of using a bandage to repair pieces of wood to recreate myself. So I ask participants who do this activity to select some wood from the floor worth of wood that there is, different pieces. They take their 7 pieces, they connect them with the plaster, which sets very quickly. It's one of its great assets. They then use the 7 pieces to construct a representation of themselves. Now usually people do this in groups, and certainly in pairs to start with, because although I'm doing this myself here, it's because I've done it many times. Usually it's something that is much better done collaboratively. So what I find interesting about this work, and why I have written about it at length and explored it with different groups, is in many ways it personifies an artist-led creative encounter with the public. In that, what it does is it provides a well-researched and well-worked-out framework, which in this case is the 7 pieces of wood that I know can be connected to make a figure. And one of the beauties of this is really you cannot do this wrong. Every single figure people make looks good, and often I ask people to represent themselves in these figures. So I've had people where they brought particular pieces of wood to the table which represent their height or their disability or whatever that might be. They can't make the figure wrong, and these figures as well are designed specifically, inevitably, that once they're made, they cannot stand up on their own. So they need another figure to hold on to in order to stand. So when you're at the point of putting on the final arm of the figure, normally you would find your partner and connect it to a partner, find a point of balance, hold it to harden, and once it's hardened, you would be able to stand back from the figure and see the two balanced beautifully together and supporting one another. So obviously there's a lot of symbolism in this piece, and it has worked on the whole in very interesting ways with multiple groups, adults, children, and one of the groups I find I use it with more than anyone are teaching artists, community-based artists. And in using this as a kind of exemplar, I am able to talk through the issues surrounding, and we're able to share those issues of community artist-led work. This is how they look when they're all put together. This is one of the various forms of them. They connect in different ways. I make lots of drawings. It's one of my tools. This is using iPad again, all drawn on iPad. Means of reflecting on the work, understanding the work, honing the work, preparing the participants and the support staff on how they're made, why they're made, what happens during the process of them being made, the relationships between them. This is ultimately a relationship-based work because it is about the relationship that happens between the people who are making them around the table and the fact that they make this thing together. This is in New York in Carnegie Hall, working with a group of teaching artists. to make them. As I say, it's been a really useful tool in that respect. Huon people might notice I've got my Signet Folk Festival t-shirt on there in New York, but it works with different groups of adults in the studio, and the biggest outing for this has been in Tate Modern in London, where a one-day event brought together hundreds of people with thousands of pieces of wood to create multiple figures of different sorts. The people select the wood, they work together in groups, the artist is there with them to help them, and the culmination, you can see the pair at the front there working in a pair to make their figures, was a community. And that's what ends up with this, is an installation or a community of figures, all different, celebrating difference, all with different lumps and bumps and stances, but they all come together with a great sense of belonging. The third element of our work is the social practice, and this is really based around the house that I'm sitting in right now, which is in South Arm Road, and the project here is called All That We Are, which is an immersive practice project where the house is the centre of focus for activity, often around food, discussion, sharing of knowledge, sharing of ideas. Groups from various different places come, individuals come as artists in residence, and it, over the first 4 years, has been an extraordinary place of having literally hundreds of different artists coming in and connecting through this creativity. And one of the projects it spawned in the first year was the Atelier project, and this is, in the first year, one group of the Atelier artists listening to a provocation by Lenine Burke around community engagement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that project later, and you can find out more about it at ateliertasmania.org. So, as I said, my practice falls into 3 areas, and I constantly use drawing to look at how those things connect, the overlaps, the important elements, what are the common denominators of this practice. It's something I'm really interested in. Personal, public, participatory, social. What's the common things? Well, for me, they're emergent and multifaceted. My work is open, flexible, and designed. I assemble and gather. Connecting to self and community is important. For me, seeking an elusive whole. Fluid creative roles within myself and the groups I work with, and perhaps most important of all, the work is transformative in some way. So, brings to the question of, well, what is this community arts, or CACD, which is Community Arts and Cultural Development, or this artist-led public participatory art? Well, the Australia Council definition is community arts and cultural development encompasses collaborations between professional artists and communities based on a community's desire to achieve artistic and social outcomes. Another name for this kind of work is teaching artistry. Teaching artists is a practicing professional artist with the complementary skills, curiosities and sensibilities of an educator, who can effectively engage a wide range of people in learning experiences in, through and about the arts. So for me, there are all these different titles which in a sense are less important than the practice itself: socially engaged, teaching artists, CACD. But there are some common factors to be able to foster a high quality creative experience with communities. And what are they? What I think you need for this kind of work and practice is some kind of curatorial framework. It sounds like you need it for an exhibition, a curatorial framework, but I think it's actually a really useful way of thinking about a practice, because it provides a set of values, design principles and pedagogical approaches that support an engagement with a creative activity or an arts experience. So the very way things are designed, the very way the detail of everything happens, can reflect a pedagogical, conceptual approach to the way you work. So the example I'm showing here is I'd set this drawing up with the tables being in a circle for this activity at Art Play, and this was my drawing for the plan of the workshop. And one of my staff said to me, it'd be much easier if we could just put the tables in lines, because we can move around them easier. And my first thing was, yeah, okay, we can do that. And then I stopped and said, no, actually, we need them in a circle because the circle is representative of a much more democratic way of working. My point here is that it's important to follow through all of these core beliefs into all the elements of the program delivery. And here I've started to think about self-assembly, which is the name of that work, with the figures, around what is important about them. What are the factors that for me are exemplified? The role of the artist, for me, images of myself. They're made by hand. They can't stand on their own. There's a sense of community. Those things are important, and they're the way I think about my work. And when people make them, that I said transformation is important, inevitably, as they were making them, and I documented this over many years, there's always a sense of fear at the beginning and then a sense of challenge. And then people really get into it, and I hope you'll recognize this when you share your practice with participants, public, children, families, young people. There's always this fear and challenge, and then people go, right, okay, I've got it, and they get into it, and they enter in the middle there a sense of flow. They're moving with it, they're changing, they're thinking, they're completely immersed. And with the figures, there is a moment when they affix the figures to one another, which is an extraordinary moment of fulfillment and completion. And there is a cycle here of transformation. Again, I'm showing this because this is a way I think about my work, and I think it's a useful way of conceiving of a community-based practice. But going back to what are those factors? Well, when we were at Art Play, we came up with this diagram. And this was really, what are those, for us, 6 key design factors which lead to creative, inspiring, and imaginative art experiences for children? Well, they need to be child-centered. For us, that was absolutely critical. They need to be engaging. Exploratory. There's no point in just colouring things in that are already there. This is about exploring new ways of doing things, new ideas. Inclusivity is important, that we ensured there was a participation of diverse communities and offers multiple views of the world. Sustainability was very critical. Artists were not using unnecessary materials. And the last one here for us was that it was really carefully designed. It was planned. It was designed to be appropriate for the children. It was thought through. It was using authentic materials. So they were our 6 elements. And the challenge I'm setting you, and I set the group at the end of April, was, well, what are those factors that we think are important if we undertake any kind of community creative encounter? What would be our circles? There could be more than 6, there could be less. What would we put in them that are pretty critical? Well, from my experience, there's 1 or 2 definite ones. A level of trust is very important, that you and your participants, you can generate, whether it's a quick 1-hour workshop or it's an ongoing engagement over many years. Trust is very important, and that needs to be there in order to get a good community creative encounter. I put listening, not talking in as one, because I'm doing all the talking today and not listening, but listening to the community, that it is whatever community you're working with, you're working to support their voice. But what are the other ones? And these are for you to think about. And in a way, this is only part of the story, because once you've thought about this, so what are the factors that go into this? Well, why are we doing it? What's this for? What actually comes out of these creative encounters? What is it that we're really searching for to come out? Well, clearly, a sense of community is one of the objectives, one of the impacts of this kind of work. It may be a sense of resilience. It certainly could be a sense of agency with the people we're working with. And these factors will change according to where we are, but they're an important way of thinking and really almost reverse engineering and thinking, well, what are my factors that I want there? Okay, so if they're what I want to get out of it, what do we need to put inside of it? So I'm going to leave it there. That's the challenge for you to think around. What are the factors that support community creative encounters? How can you build environments, spaces, ways of thinking, provision of tools, time, pacing? It's a whole range of things. What are those? And at the end of it, how do you know that you have succeeded in some way with your intention? That was a very quick run through. Atelier is a project that I'm going to let you look up, www.ateliertasmania.org, and you are very welcome to come and join us. It is a learning exchange program for artists who work in communities in socially engaged ways across the state. It's statewide at the moment, and it's really has an intention of fostering some new practice, not just going through the nuts and bolts of things, but really thinking about how does this practice of working with communities connect to living, connect to good health, connect to good eating, connect to being on our land, to being on country, whatever those things are. It's a practice around connecting with ourselves and with our communities. I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time. If you want to get hold of me, my email address will be available, and I'm very happy for you to contact me through the ateliertasmania.org website. Thanks a lot.